Hello. Today's missive is entitled Thought Before Action. Um, the real title of what I want to talk about is the non-physical precedes the physical, but I thought that was a bit technical and might put a lot of people off. But thought before action um, accurately describes the fact that the non-physical not only precedes the physical, but actually creates the physical. Um, there's many ways to explain this, and it's backed up by not leading edge science, but the science of the last 20 years of quantum physics. Um, many people have walked around with the famous Einstein quote, E equals mc squared, on a t-shirt. They may or may not know what it means. But without getting too scientific, too technical, or too boring, E equals mc squared simply says energy and matter are the same thing. E, energy, equals is m, matter, times some number. But anyway, energy is matter. They're the same thing. Go and do a little bit of research on quantum physics, and they will find the same thing. We used to think in a physical universe. We used to think that the universe was made of atoms, and that atoms were like little pebbles. We thought that the solar system was kind of a model of an atom, that you had this big central solid core like the sun, and there was these planet-like little peas revolving around it. Quantum physics has overturned the Newtonian view of the universe, and they realize that these atoms themselves don't actually exist, that an atom is mostly space. And then they went from there to realize that the constituents of an atom, like the proton and the neutrons that are in the core, and the electrons that orbit it, are nothing more than energy themselves. They are not actually physical. They don't actually exist as physical objects. They are energy. Various other experiments, like the famous dual slit experiment, discovered that everything is a wave or a particle. The wave or the field precedes the particle. The wave collapses into the particle. The particle has no existence before the wave collapses into the particle. The wave is preeminent, and everything comes from the wave, and the wave is non-physical. The wave is whatever the wave is. It is energy. It is not something that you can touch with your fingers, or smell, or taste, or hear. It is non-physical. As far as the five senses are concerned, it does not exist. Okay? And it precedes that which does exist. It precedes that which you can touch or taste or smell or feel or hear. And so why did I title it The Thought Before Action? Well, all action is the result of thought. It could be a conscious thought or an unconscious thought, but the thought was there whether you were aware of it or not. Okay. Let's give a little metaphor, because we like metaphors. You look round and there's a cup of tea sitting. This is actually empty. I've already finished this delicious metaphor, but there's a cup of tea next to you. So how did that cup of tea get there? Well, some creature had a thought about a cup of tea. It was probably you. The most likely course of action is that you had a sensation in your body called thirst. That is a want, desire, or goal that needs to be fulfilled. It is something that is wrong with what is, that you desire to be changed. So you come up with a method of satiating your thirst, of satisfying your want. This is all non-physical. This is all in your head. There is nothing that anybody else could see at the moment. You could have your eyes shut and somebody could think you're asleep. But this activity, this action is going on in your head, this thought action. So you think, how will I best, in this instant, at this time, in this place, satisfy my want for not being thirsty? How do I start? And you think, oh, I know, cup of tea. That's a good idea. And at that point, the cup of tea has been created. You have the ideation of a cup of tea. But a cup of tea is just ethereal. There's no dimensions. There's nothing about this cup of tea yet. So next you have to come up with a way of implementing this strategy of satisfying your want with tea by coming up with an implementation plan. Tea is not going to just magically appear next to you. I'm going to use the simplest example where you satisfy your own want by you going and making your own damn cuppa, is that you have to, whether you consciously or not, it's probably going to be unconscious because you've done it so many times that you don't have to think about it, but the thought is there in your unconscious. In other words, the thoughts are there, but they're not absolutely up on the screen of your awareness. They're like running as an automatic script that you don't have to think about. A low power button came up there, just we were wondering what was happening. So we'll try and cut this short. So having had a want to satisfy your thirst, having come up with a strategy for satisfying your thirst with tea, and then coming up with an implementation plan, and all of these things are non-physical. Sort of the strategy and the plan are non-physical. You then manifest that plan by getting out of your chair, going to your kitchen, getting your cup out of your cupboard, turning your tap on, and filling your kettle with your water, boiling the kettle, putting a tea bag in the cup, blah, 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 going back with your cup of tea, sitting down again, oh, cup of tea, lovely. That does the trick. So you had to have those thoughts before you could produce the cup of tea. There is no other way. Now, I can hear you saying, I've woken up with a cup of tea before and I didn't think about it. Well, that's entirely possible. My point is that somebody thought about the cup of tea. So imagine you dropped off and your darling wife thought, oh, I'll make him a cup of tea because I love him so much. He's handsome and he's a good father. He looks after the kids. And she brings the cup of tea through and you're asleep. You're snoozing in the chair. So he says, gosh, look at him. I'll set the cup of tea down to him and he can have it when he wakes. And under those circumstances, yes, you did not have a thought for producing tea. And you wake up and there the tea is. We've already said your wife did. A thought preceded the action of the tea. It was just a thought in her head, not a thought in your head. Okay. Another scenario that could come about is, yes, you could wake up from your snooze. There's a cup of tea. Where did that come from? Oh, I made the tea before I dropped off, didn't I? Yeah, silly me. Well, at the point you were going, where did that come from? It is true. You believed that you hadn't thought about a cup of tea and you believed that you hadn't produced it. At that point, you erroneously thought that thought did not precede that cup of tea. And then you go, oh yeah, I did. And you realize it was just an error of perception. And in fact, you did think about that cup of tea before you produced it. And it can be no other way in this world that anything is produced that was not first in the non-physical and at a detailed level in the non-physical. I'm wearing a pair of glasses. Somebody had to think about the problem of poor eyesight, a method of satisfying the desire for clarity, and then had to think of the physical parameters of this product. And then they had to source materials, they had to design it and the frame, and they had to think about what dimensions it would be, and somebody had to think about how they would market it, who they would market it to, where it would be sold, what price point, and everything. All of this is in somebody's head. It is all non-physical. And it is only when all the non-physical details were there, and these glasses were produced in the non-physical, that they could finally press the button and manifest them into the physical. Yeah. Nothing is produced in the physical that is not already produced in the non-physical and then simply manifested. And that is very important and very interesting. And there's a biblical precedent for it too. What does it say at the beginning of Genesis? Something like, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, which makes you to wonder, what did God produce if the word, if the plan he had was God, and they went ahead and manifested it? That's another video. Okay. But the idea was, even in the Bible, they say before anything existed, it existed as a thought in God's mind, and then God went ahead and produced it. So the non-physical produced the physical. The physical, the world, the flesh, sprang from the non-physical. Think about you. At one point in time, you weren't even a twinkle in the milkman's eye. Sorry, that's a private joke about you arriving because you were a twinkle in the milkman's eyes, not your father's. So forgive my army humour with that one. So at one point, you weren't even a twinkle in your father's eye. But then, hopefully, if everything proceeded, sort of consciously and planned rather than some sort of unfortunate accident behind the disco, beer-fueled accident, hopefully somebody thought, let's have a baby together. And at that point, the baby had no dimensions. It was just ethereal, a baby. And then they went ahead and in the physical world took the rather nice actions of manifesting that desire. So at one point, you existed in the non-physical, which kinds of alludes to a question that we're going to answer in greater detail. Who were you before you were born? Because you existed in your father and mother's head before you existed in reality. While you were still, you were always an ovum. You've always been the egg. The egg that is you actually existed at one point in time inside your grandmother. Before your mother was born with all her eggs. So at one point, your egg was in your grandmother's stomach. We'll come back to that again, because that's quite interesting implications. And although sperm are produced and have a life and die, depending on how long it took for them, when parents say, "Oh, we're trying for a baby," how long did it take? Well, it could have been the first time, or they could have been trying for 2 years. So, but at least at some point, both the egg and the sperm existed before the physical world aligned to make their joining a physical reality that resulted in you, the person. So you existed as a thought in somebody's head before you existed in the physical in any way, shape, or form, other than an unrealized egg and an unrealized sperm. In fact, at the time that you were planned, you might not even have been an existing sperm. It might have been before. If it took several years for you to be sort of manifested in the flesh, absolutely, when you were conceived in the mind, you could not have existed in the flesh. Anyway, I divert. I hope you get the idea, this very, very important idea, that the non-physical precedes the physical. The wave collapses into the particle. The wave is pre-existing and the particle is a manifestation out of the wave. The wave condenses into the particle. The thought precedes the action. The plan exists before the product. The non-physical precedes the physical. The physical cannot exist in the physical unless and only if it existed in the non-physical first. Okay? Bit shorter than usual, but this is a vital, 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 essential point to grasp, okay? And I'm going to repeat it shamelessly once again. The non-physical precedes the physical, and the physical cannot exist lest it first exists in the non-physical. Here endeth the lesson.